2 or 3 weeks now, and it has a lot of things in it that I think that it's good for us to study and think about. Remember in chapter 4, we have Peter and John has gone to worship at the temple, and on their way to the temple they find a man that is lame, and he's sitting there asking for alms or asking for some help. And Peter and John told him that they didn't have silver and gold to give him, but what they did have was the power of Jesus Christ, that this lame man was healed. And people noticed him being healed and noticed he could walk for the first time in his life. And he was jumping around and praising God, able to go to the temple to worship probably for the first time in his life. So his life was changed completely that day, and people was wondering about it, and Peter and John took the opportunity to preach. And he was preaching to those people that it was not through our power that this lame man was healed, but he was healed through the power of Jesus Christ that was resurrected from the dead. Now the Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection, and so this brought on hostility. They didn't want Peter and John to continue to have the opportunity to preach. And so Peter, in his preaching, he made the comment in verse 11, says, "Neither is the stone which was set at naught of you builders, which is become the head of the corner." In other words, he's saying to them that this you're doing to Jesus exactly the same thing as the builders did whenever they was building the temple. That they, in building the temple, they was very familiar with this story. And so as the builders was building the temple, you remember that they sized the rock and hewed them out, and they did everything on site at the quarry or in the woods. And so they would bring the finished product to the temple site, and there it would be placed where it was designed to go. Well, according to Josephus, he was an early Jewish historian. He tells of this legend that they made an odd-shaped rock or stone for the temple, and they sent it from the quarry up to the temple site, and the workers kept looking at that stone, and they come to the decision that this must be, there is no place for this stone in the temple. This must be something that was sent from the quarry by accident, because it won't fit. They missized it or something, and so they eventually, to get it out of their way, they just kicked it off of the edge of the cliff down into what ran into the Kidron Valley. And they continued to building the temple. And so they rejected that stone because it didn't They didn't think that it would fit anywhere. Now what Peter is doing in preaching to them, he's saying that you're doing to Christ, you're rejecting Him as having the power to heal this man. You're rejecting Him as being resurrected from the dead in the same manner as the people that was building the temple rejected that stone. Now, there was a lot of work went into building that temple. And just to give you a little idea as to the building of the temple, remember that they had, whenever they was traveling in the wilderness for 40 years, they used the tabernacle. And it was portable. They could fold it together, and different people was responsible for moving it. Whenever they moved, they would move the tabernacle and they would set it up, the tabernacle being the presence of God. But now they're in their homeland, and the building of the temple actually took place 480 years after they left Egypt. Solomon is now king. Remember, we've had Saul as king for 40 years. We've had David as king for 40 years. Now Solomon has come on the scene. David's heart's desire was to build a temple for the Lord. But the Lord rejected him as being the one to build the temple, because he says you've been in wars and battles and things all your life, and so your son Solomon will be the one to build the temple. David spent the rest of his life in gathering material and things to build that temple. He had the plan for the temple, and he gave that plan to David. And so after Solomon has been at king for about 4 years, he begins to move to build the temple. The tabernacle, when it was built, was 45 feet long and 15 feet wide and 15 feet high. Whenever they're building the temple, it's going to be twice that size. And it's going to take them about 7.5 years to build this temple. Just to give you an idea of what this temple may have looked like, you may have to turn the light off and so I can see it there, Wendell, if you will. That'll give you a little bit of idea as to what Solomon's temple may have looked like. You can see it's twice, as I mentioned, twice the size of the tabernacle. So it's 90 feet long, 30 feet wide, 45 feet high. Now notice it's all the stones. It's got stones in it. It's got windows. And all of that had to be formed and shaped and for a specific location. Here in front, it had these pillars here. There's one on each side. This is 35 feet high. And it's 18 feet around one of these. And the walls, the way they describe it, is 4 fingers thick. It's 4 fingers. And then it's hollow in the center. So your wall is, we'll say 3 to 4 inches thick all the way around, hollow in the center. And it has all kinds of decorations and everything on it. It also has the laver here, and also this laver here is the brazen altar, and also the laver. The brazen altar is where they would offer the sacrifices. This brazen altar, this laver is where they kept water for whenever they was offering the sacrifices. And in the tabernacle, in the building of it, the size of it was not given. But this one, it is given to us, and it's 15 feet across the top. Now this is round, it's 45 feet around it, but straight across it's 15 feet. And it's 7.5 feet high. And it holds 17,000 gallons of water. I was talking to Larry yesterday about it and asked him what was the size of his pool. And he said his pool would hold 35,000 gallons. I was thinking at the time I was talking to him that they were saying it's 217,000 gallons, and I thought that's way too much. I went back and checked, and it's 17,000. So this is half the size of Brother Larry's pool. Holds a lot of water, and I don't know how often they filled it, but they was continuously filling it because they was continuously using that water. Now, to show you a little bit about how much work went into this, and I have a purpose for wanting you to see how dedicated they was in building these. How much effort that they put into it to make sure that everything was made the best that they could do it. And so Solomon, whenever he gets ready to start building it, he understands that some of the best trees, cedar trees and stuff, is in Lebanon, right next door to him. So he talks to Hiram, who, like David, become great friends with him. So they decided he would give them the timber that they needed. Solomon, in paying for that, he gave him 125,000 bushels of wheat every year. Give him 1,100 gallons of oil, olive oil. And he got 30,000 men together, and he divided them up 10,000 in each group. And he says, I want you, this group, to go and spend 1 month cutting trees in Lebanon. You come back, well, I'll send another group, and they'll stay a month. So the end result, you'd have 10,000 in Lebanon, you'd have 20,000 working in Israel, and they'd only have to go once every 3 months. Now, you had them cutting trees and doing everything that was necessary there. You had men that was working in the quarry, that was cutting the rock and forming them and sizing them. And Josephus tells us that most of those stones was made out of white marble. And they weighed hundreds of tons. And the size of some of them that they have found is 50 feet long, 2 feet or 24 feet wide, 16 inches thick. They found them even larger than that, some as high as 67.5 feet by 9 feet. These was used as foundation stones. In other words, they wanted to make sure that the very first thing that they did was to make sure that it was set on a firm foundation. And these foundation stones was also known as cornerstones. Right here would be a cornerstone on this here. And the reason for a cornerstone is because that's where your two walls come and intersect. The wall from this side, the wall from this direction. And so they had to make sure the cornerstone would stand the weight, had the strength and everything. They also had what they called a chief cornerstone, was kind of the starting place whenever they started building the foundation. And it would be placed first, and then maybe they'd have a dedication ceremony, and then groundbreaking ceremony, and then they would begin putting down the other foundation stones. And then they would have what they called a capstone, that whenever they got through with the building of the temple, as the legend continues that I was telling you about Josephus, whenever they got to the capstone or to finish the building out, it was an odd shape. They searched around and they couldn't find the stone that went there. So they sent back to the quarry and says, we need the stone. And the quarry comes back and says, we sent you that stone a long time ago. And it happened to be that one of the workers there, he says, I remember that stone. I remember we had an odd-shaped stone that we thought that had been misformed by those in the quarry, and so we just kicked it over the cliff to get it out of our way. We got tired of walking around. And so they go down the cliff and they find this odd-shaped stone, get the dirt off of it, cleaned it up, and hoist it back up the cliff, put it up on the temple in exact feet. Just what they needed. Now what Peter is doing, he's saying that the stone that the builders rejected in building the temple, the ones that kicked it over the cliff, that was the stone that they really needed to tie everything together. A very important stone. Now see, with a capstone and a foundation stone, you're tying that building together from top to bottom. And Jesus Christ represents the capstone and also the foundation stone. Now, whenever they was building this, now remember this building, of course it had some outbuildings and stuff, but it's only 90 feet long and 45 feet wide. But they had besides the 30,000 that they used to go to Lebanon cutting timber, they had 70,000 that says bear burdens. In other words, they helped in moving the trash and whatever needed to be done. They helped the other workers. They had 80,000 that was hewers, helped dress the timber and stuff in the mountains. So, and they had 3,300 bosses over the different projects. Now, can you imagine 30,000, 70,000, 80,000, 3,000 bosses? They worked together for over 7 years to build this building. Now, one of the questions that I was kind of wondering about was, what kind of tools did they have to work with? And I find that people has gone to different places and dug around and uncovered a lot of tools. And the tools, they found picks that was made out of iron. They had a wooden handle, but said some of those picks would weigh from 30 to 35 pounds. They found what we would call sledgehammers that they used in hewing these stones in smaller areas that they weighed from 12 to 15 pounds. And they also found saws. They said long saws. Whenever I saw that, long saw to me means a cross-cut saw, or hand cross-cut. Said it was a double-handled long saw. Well, we've got a cross-cut saw, has two handles. Then you have a man on each side. Now, Daddy always said I rode my side in cutting trees. This is the way we used to cut trees before you got power saws and stuff. Use these hand tools. But
it's kind of strange that you mentioned that. And yesterday, Rick and I went up to Barbie's place, and that metal shop that she has up in the attic, all tucked away. It's two of those hand saws.
Yeah. Yeah. Everybody had one back in the day, and what caught me by surprise says they also used them in cutting those stones. Not only wood, but also stones. Now, I don't know, there may have been a lot of sharpening going on and just how they did this, but anyway, this is what they had to work with. Then they would polish those stones. They would make them smooth and everything to where they would fit just exactly. Now, we think today that we're pretty smart, that we've got a prefab, come up with the idea of prefab buildings, prefab homes. You just go down and buy everything's cut, and all you got to do is just place it together. The temple was built by prefab. Everything was sized and everything in the quarry or out in the woods, and the finished product was brought to the temple site. Now, I want us to notice this. It's found in 1 Kings chapter 6 and verse 7. And the house, when it was in building, was built of stone, made ready before it was brought thither, so that there was neither hammer nor axe nor any tool of iron heard in the building while it was in building. In other words, everything was cut to fit, and they could assemble it on the temple site, but they didn't have to use any hammers or any saws. Said it couldn't be heard. And I wondered why. Now you may have other ideas and other thoughts, but this is what come to my mind. That quarry where they dug the rock out, sized them, formed them, then remember they weighed hundreds of tons, so they had to, I'm sure, put them on poles, and these thousands of men is working. They would have to push and pull to eventually get it to the site. But the quarry would be the world. And the temple site would represent heaven. Now, here's where I'm coming from. That all the shaping, forming that needs to be done in our life is done here in the world, while in this life. Everything's said and done that's going to be in this life, and then when we get to heaven, everything's in place. In fact, Christ is building a place for us now. But all the things that we need to do to get our life, God working on us to help us to form our life as He should, is done here and now. Now, Christ is our chief cornerstone. He's the capstone. He's the rejected stone. But a lot of people today is doing exactly the same thing that those workers did whenever they tumbled that odd-looking stone down the cliff, thinking that it wouldn't fit anywhere. Well, there is a lot of us today that Jesus doesn't fit in our life as He should. And I want to show you, try to put this down in for us today, that we're in the building of our temple, or building of our life. That's what we want to think of. We're building our life today. We're getting the material out of the quarry. Now here, as I mentioned in the beginning, we have to have a good foundation. That was the first thing that they dealt with, was to make sure they had the cornerstones and chief cornerstones and everything that would hold the building up. Whenever we was started building this church, that's one of the first things that we give a lot of consideration to. Was first that we wanted to get a person that we thought was the best concrete man in the country to come and pour concrete and to build the forms and everything. And so in talking to him and everything, it was decided that it would be to our advantage that we would put some pillars down the side of this wall here and across the back, because we had some fill-in back there. So we drill big holes down and fill them full of concrete ever so often, all the way around, to make sure that we had a firm foundation and it hadn't moved. It hadn't, it's been perfect. That's firm foundation is Jesus Christ. This is a Christian here. This is a picture of a child of God, that he is building his life to the best of his ability to the plan that God has for his life. Now, I don't know where you probably can't see it. You can move forward if you need to see it. But here on the bottom, notice how every piece of wood that he places there is shaped perfectly. It's designed where it will fit closely together. Every one of them same size and everything. And he even designed that so that on the bottom it says Jesus is Lord. Now you could look at his life and you could come to that conclusion. And he was so organized in building his life and had everything together that whenever he was building this row here, he had everything in order, because he started with 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Everything in place. Notice he's still building. He is building a life that is pleasing to God. Now, here is an example of a person that is saved. He started out with a good foundation, just like this man, building it on Christ. But you will notice that as he's building his life, he gets kind of careless. He decides that he'll put some different material in his life that would probably not, in his thinking, won't really do any damage to the building of my life. You will notice that he had some gaps in his life. And that tells me that there's some things missing in his life. He's not as happy as he should be or could be. He's got a lot of work to do. Even though he's saved, he's got some things that he needs to get rid of. These things here, he needs to get them out because they won't fit in his life as they should. And he also has some things that he needs to add to his life. Now keep in mind, it's not all that simple just to wake up one day and say, I'm going to get this out of my life. This here can represent some things that he needs to get out of his life. Worry. That worry, or he's got some problems with being ungrateful too. A little bit of envy. Does a lot of complaining. Even though he's a child of God, he's got some things that is keeping him to get where he needs to be here. And so he's got to work on that. And like I say, through a lot of prayer and stuff, he can take some of that stuff out. And then he needs to be to where he can add some stuff. whenever he begins to remove that worry and place his hope in Christ, well, then he begins to do a better job in building his life back. See how much he begins to use the same material, and it fits together. His life is beginning to come together. He has more peace, joy, and it's going to take a lot of work to fill these gaps that he's got missing in his life. The world is right here. And he's got to get the world out so that he can begin to get his life like this person here. Now here is an unsaved person. I want you to notice his foundation. You first thought, well, his foundation is a whole lot thicker than this foundation, and this represents Christ. But notice in his foundation, it has a lot of holes in it. He's not built on Christ. He's building his life on other things rather than Christ.
How many times have we done that, Fred?
And notice, I was thinking, this past week down in Houston area, and down in that area, they got rain up to 48 inches. Some places 42 to 48 inches of rain. That's waist high. This man is like the man that built his house on sand. Whenever the storms come, see these weak places in his foundation, this worldly foundation that he's built, water's going to get in there, and it's going to seep in his house or tear his house down. Now, him being unsaved, he has some good things about his life. Maybe he goes to church on occasion. Maybe he reads his Bible on occasion. He's a pretty good old boy in the community. But his life as a whole, he's unsaved, and his life is full of worldly things. Things that before he can start building, he has to get out of his life. And actually what he's got to do is start from the foundation. He's got to accept Christ as his Lord and Savior. And then he can begin to build a life that would be pleasing to the Lord. Now, I'm sure all of you are here. Got everything under control according to God's plan. But some of us, we may be here. We've got some things in our life that we need to add. We've got some things in our life we need to get rid of. And whether it's add to it or take away, it can be hard. But since we've got the right foundation, we can begin to build a life that's pleasing to the Lord. Now I mentioned the fact that the temple, they built it in 7 years, 7.5 to be exact. 7 being the number of complete. Well, I've been in laid my foundation to build my life on when I was 16 years old. And I'm still in the quarry. I'm still in the building process. I'm now 74 years old. The Lord's been working on me all that time, and so far, neither one of us hadn't given up. But we've still got a lot of work to do. But we can't start unless we have a proper foundation. Anyone have any thoughts? Any comments?
It's also key to have that cornerstone in place, building upon that foundation.
Yeah. You know, they say that they think that they have found the chief cornerstone. That's the stone that they started the building with. And they say it is off the edge of the cliff on the southeast corner of where the temple was, and it landed on a rock down there that it's 79 feet from the top of the ground down where they say that chief cornerstone is laying today.
Did Nebuchadnezzar have it destroyed?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. That temple stayed through all the kings. Nebuchadnezzar destroyed it, carried all the stuff into Babylon. Then we have Nehemiah coming back, building the wall, Ezra,